Yeah, my name is Carlson Keith James, and I live in with my wife Mary and our 6 children. We're making this record of our life for you to enjoy. Some of you younger ones won't be able to hear me personally, so that's why we're making this record of the James family. And one aspect of it is the rabbit. We owe our wealth, you might say, to the fact of rabbits being a nuisance in Australia to some people, but not to the rabbit producer, because they send it to England and we get some money back. Just a short idea is the sign. This is the sign that actually hung above the stall, and you can see it's pretty well worn out in one sense, but our famous saying as the Jameses is, "We've got the bunny if you've got the money." And I thought that was embarrassing. All these ladies shopping for the market on Thursday, I think it was, and they would make all sorts of improper suggestions, but if you want to know about that, you have to ask your mummy. I didn't work there for that long, probably about 6 months, I think, when it wasn't a very happy time in my life working for my father and grandfather, so I didn't hang around the factory that long after work, to put it bluntly. But there were one particular man, which I'll mention if I can remember his name. It's funny, your mind blocks off. Spiro, yeah, his name was Spiro. He had been in the Second World War as a child. He was Yugoslav from Eastern Europe, and he had seen his whole family machine gunned. It had turned his mind. He was an inoffensive person. We would come to work sometimes. We'd be there about 7:15 in the morning. We need to work from Brighton to South Africa, to South Melbourne, and this chap would be asleep because he was an alcoholic. He'd be asleep in the gutter with the water running over his body. This is in Australia, our country. My parents and I lived in East Brighton, up one end of Coma Street in East Brighton, and my grandfather, my dad's father, lived up the other end of this short street, and so we obviously saw a lot of each other, but we didn't particularly get along. Unfortunately, it wasn't a happy home, let's put it that way, and it was a sad thing because the amount of money that could be made was enormous and was made. But unfortunately, as in the case of my grandfather, the money was lost because they wasted it on drinking alcohol and things like that. But of course, my mother was just a typical housewife. And when I say just, I don't belittle her, but she was a loyal housewife who supported her husband, even though he didn't necessarily support her. And us children, 5 in relatively short time, it's inevitable. We used to do a little bit of fighting. It wasn't something I consciously decided to change. I found that the values of my mother and her mother, my grandmother, who lived at Frankston, and she was a widow, I found their values were very good, and without thinking about it, I took up the value of them, and that's why we're making decisions. My mother and my grandmother were a very great influence for good upon me and my brothers and sisters. Francis came out as a convict. He was charged and convicted for stealing £10, which £10 back in the 1870s was a lot of money. And he was transported to Australia free of charge, but he couldn't leave when he wanted to. Yes, it's time to tell you a little story. When I was born, I had two grandparents living, and one of them spoilt me very much and let me do anything I liked, and the other one was very strict. Well, the one who let me do what I liked was my father's mother, who was very soft when it came to babies and let them have what they will. And the grandmother, who was my mother's mother, she was very strict, but she had much more skill and common sense at raising children. She had 5 of her own. So I was always on the go to go and see my grandmother in Brighton, because when this occurred, my father hadn't built the house in Brighton, but when the house became built and I knew about it, I wanted to go and see her rather than be strictly taken care of. So I was about 4 years of age, which isn't very old, and I knew that you caught the train to go from Richmond to Brighton station, but that's not actually correct. You go from Richmond to score the train the other way. Yes, so I determined that in my little mind, the strict grandma was minding me and in charge, but in my mind I wanted to go and see Grandma Eva, that's my father's mother, and stay with her and eat chocolates and as much butter on my bread as I wanted, and she was very bad at spoiling children. So I gathered all my worldly goods together, one of which was a penny, and I went down to the station, and where you buy your ticket, where it projects out, I got underneath that and past it, and then in the gate onto the platform. And the train pulled in and I caught the train, but little did I know, it was not a train that went to Brighton at all. It was a train that went into the city. And I was sitting there in the train when it took off, and away we went. And I suppose a couple of stations, there was a man, I just can remember him, riding in the same compartment as I was, and he said to himself, there's something wrong here, a kid this young. So when the train came to what is actually Richmond, coming in the other direction, the wrong direction, he went and got the station master and the driver, and they worked out where I'd come from, and they decided to take me back on the next train coming the other way, towards the Sandringham train. She took me, or he, the porter, took me around to our place, because it was only a small suburb. It didn't take long to work out who I was. And Grandma was confronted with this man in uniform bringing her grandson back, and she didn't even know he was missing. So you can imagine I was tempered very strictly and received many welts with a belt on my backside in order to let him know, let me know, that's not the way to go. That's the kind of thing that we've got up to. Yes, and that was kindergarten, and then we had the primary school, which was from grade 1 up to grade 6. And for that I went first of all to the local Catholic primary school run by nuns. I think they were presentation nuns, there's the order, but I'm not sure now. But that was St Mary's in Hampton, where I went to school for a short time. Incentives that the nuns and the lay teachers used were quite novel. One of them was they were put a prize up for sale for those who were not for sale, to be won by those in kindergarten, in primary school. And for the boys it was a little lead cannon with that fired, spring-loaded, and it was about so big, and it fired matches. And the girls' one, I think, from memory, was a wooden pencil box. That's right, to keep their pencils in. I didn't win the prize, but it made me realise about having incentives. Because on the way home from school every night, I was learning, it was spelling, and I was teaching myself, as taught by the nuns, B-I-C-Y, how to spell it. So B-I-C-Y-C-L-E. And I used to repeat it, B-I-C-Y-C-L-E, B-I-C-Y-C-L-E. And they eventually got, I can still remember it today. That's about 70 years ago. Not a big word, but there. When I was in primary school, we had to learn the Hail Marys. You would have, if you went to school as well, and so on and so forth. And I wasn't particularly interested in religion at that stage as a primary school person, but we had to learn the prayers just like everything by rote. And you say it, but you weren't thinking about it. I can remember feeling a bit naughty when I'm praying to God with one part of my mind, and the other part wants to get home and have a cake and a milk to eat. You know, we did it because we were told to do it. Here's another aspect of school discipline that the Catholic Church dealt with, and don't get me wrong, I don't agree with a lot of what they say, particularly when it comes to talking about the Lord Jesus himself. But their discipline was often very good because they had the authority. And to give you an example, in year 7 or 8, grade 7 or 8 in secondary school at Christian Brothers College in St Kilda, a friend of mine, we were sitting together, John Hardy was his name, or is his name, and he was a very good athlete. And John Hardy and I were having the desk lids up, we were laughing behind the lid. I can't remember nothing serious, but I suddenly felt a cold chill go down my spine, and a hot flush ran up my neck. And I looked up, and this was Brother Hardy, who was a bloke big as I was, and very strong Christian brother. And I looked up at him like this, and he looked at me, he said, "James," because I'm Carl James, "James, come with me," and Hardy. He took us into the next room, and this is a school with no heating whatsoever, freezing cold. You got 6 of the best, and there was a leather strap that was wielded by a man who really knew his stuff, who was keen to impress this Christian brother. I can't remember his name now, but we got 6 of the best, and I was really hurting, and it was hurting that much. And I was silly enough the next day, for some strange reason, we got pulled in for the same offence in the same class with the same 2 idiots, you know, and we got 6 of the best again. They didn't have to hit me at all. I just say, "James, yes, sir, whatever you say, it'll get done," you know. And Army cadets, that's another thing. Well, the Army cadets was held once a week or twice a week, together with 2 weeks camping once a year. And it was for year 8 and year 9. I was the tallest, so in my class, so I got to be put in the Army cadets, which meant that I got to take a rifle and bayonet home with me. Now you think about this is a 14-year-old boy with a full-on Army rifle. I fired my rifle at the range at Seymour, where you would have come on the train as you came up. And we got to take our rifles home with us on the train from Prahran to Brighton, and we've got these big Army rifles with the bayonet. The bayonet's about that long, and nobody was horrified or nothing was said about it. Whereas today, there'd be a national uprising by the authorities if they saw a child on a desktop. I had a best friend. It's a great thing, I don't know about you, but to have a best friend is really something. If you've got a best friend, it's amazing between the two of you what you can accomplish. Peter Vallis was the eldest of 5 children. I mean, he lived in Carrington Grove, a part of the suburb of Brighton, just about 500 metres from where I lived. And we were good mates, is the expression we use. And he and I were best friends from primary school, secondary school, and then he went on to work in the automotive industry, and I did for a little while as well. But we used to go in for all sorts of funny things. But tennis was our game. We were keen on tennis. I wasn't particularly good at it, and Peter was, and he and I used to play tennis not only during the week in the daytime when it was sporting time, but after school when everybody else had gone home. And that's the sort of things we knew each other very well, and we didn't have to talk about things. He understood if I said something, and I understood him if he said something. And we used to get up to scuffles or troubles too. My father and my uncle Harry James built a bungalow, you know, a small 4-berth bungalow, which we boys lived in. The only trouble is with 4 boys as energetic as we are, inevitably things got broken. Like we had old carpet on the floor as we got a Victor motor mower, and for some strange reason we opened the door and put this Victor mower inside the bungalow on top of the carpet and started it up, and bits of carpet flew in all directions. And again, it's a wonder my father didn't murder us. The things we got up to. And so that having a best friend doesn't mean we don't get into trouble once in a while, but we kept a check on each other and we understood each other, and that's important. Oh, I'll tell you a funny one. Can I tell you a funny one? A couple of doors down the road from us in Brighton, it was a fairly affluent suburb, still is. Yes, there was a family who had a son. For some reason he took a dislike to me, this Bruce, can't think of his last name. We're about the same age, 2 doors down, and he started shy-acting me. Means he started being rude to me, and when I walked past he would throw things at me, and he just absolutely rude, and I didn't like this at all. And of course she taught me to like people and be well-mannered, but she didn't mean to make yourself a fool and let people bash you up, but I didn't understand the difference. And I was going past his house and he had another go at me, and he threw a tomato or some wet fruit at me. It went on my favourite army jumper that I got, ex-army clothing. I love wearing those sort of things. And I went into the house and said to Mum, she said, "What's the trouble? You don't look happy." I told her the story of this bloke who called me something army jumper. What I forgot? Yeah, buck teeth army jumper, because I have got buck teeth. And I thought, what? He said, "No, you go down and deal with him, don't. You know, you don't have to put up with this." I thought, good. And because again, he was a big boy too, he was about my size. But down I went to the garage, and there was no holding back now. I said, "Bruce," whatever his name is, "come and get it." You know? And Bruce came bounding up the driveway, thinking, "Oh, I'll bash him up." And he got to me. He got to within that, and I just went boom, and hit him. And down he went on the front lawn. I wasn't there to muck around or talk. My mother had given me permission. Have you ever heard such a thing? Yeah. Anyway, I could talk about Mum all day. We met at the Powerhouse Rowing Club on Albert Park Lake. And uh, the reason that we met is because I very rarely went to the dance there. I went probably only about 3 or 4 times. And Mary had come out from Tasmania to start a job as a national secretary of an organisation. And she lived just 400 metres down the road from where the rowing club is. And I was unaware of her till I went to the dance one Saturday night, and they all lined up on one side and the boys lined up on the other side, like they do at those dances still, I suppose. And I saw her, walked across the room, asked her to dance. She came out with me. We had a dance and we started chatting. I got her a drink of Fanta at the counter of the... There wasn't any alcohol back then. And we talked and talked. It was time to go home. And I said, well, what are you doing? Would you like to go for a coffee or something? Or a chocolate drink or something? And I can't remember exactly what she said. She said, oh, it lives just down the next corner. And so Mary told me that she wasn't that fussed whether to do it or not, but when I got in the car I turned up and I was driving this beautiful little motor car, and straight away she was attracted to it. And she said, oh well, yes, all right, we'll go for it. Coffee and toast. And I drove her for the 400, no, we went up to Turak Road and came back. So from having met her that night, it was about 1 kilometre, I reckon, maybe 2 kilometres into St Kilda Road where the restaurant, the Cockpit restaurant was. And she and I talked again. Time to go. By this stage it was probably after midnight. And I drove her back to the flat, and she lived in a flat with several girls who worked for these various organisations. And Mary went inside, and I didn't say, I'll see you again. I just said, I'll see you later. And out she hopped. I took her up to the door, which is what I believe is a gentlemanly thing to do. And that was the end of it for that time, but things were afoot. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I thought more and more about it. And the girls wouldn't believe that she had driven home in a handsome stranger with blue eyes and blonde hair, and you couldn't convince them. They thought Mary was pulling their leg, you know, but she wasn't. And 2 weeks later, it was a hot night. It was summertime. It was a hot night, and I thought, what'll I do tonight? And I thought, I'll go and check out that red-haired girl, because Mary had red hair, which I noticed as soon as I came out of the dance a fortnight before, which was a bit of a shock. But anyway, I thought I can get used to that. And I went round there and said, would you like to go for a drive? Because it was a hot night and had the hood off. And away we went down to Mordialloc, which is on the way to Frankston. And I bought her some chips. Mary always loved food. So I bought her some chips. And then we really were talking in earnest. And this time the girls did see me drop you off. And of course then they were serious. And the rest is history. Yes, people often ask about the little Austin Healey Sprite that I drove and that I had when I met Mary. Actually, I bought and sold that car 3 times. And it was a wonderful machine, because it was not only enjoyable to drive, but also attracted girls, which was nice. And particularly Mary, she loved it, didn't you? And she was surprised that a handsome fellow with a blue sports car would bother to take her home, but I did. and that was where it all began. So the vehicle had a real part to play in us getting to know each other. The car, what can I say about the car? It was a stock standard car at its time. It went very well. I had the engine out more than once. I think I had it out twice. We were just discussing, Mary and I, she and I put the engine back in on a Saturday night, finished at 6 a.m. Sunday morning, threw our stuff in the back, drove up the Hume Highway all the way to Benalla, where the Sprite Drivers Club was competing, and I was on the team in a 6-hour race. I ended up driving nearly nearly 4.5 hours, because the other two in the team broke down. But that's the time when I was driving around and I wondered what I was going to do about saying to you to marry me. Mary had been throwing some broad hints, and the standard question when we were kissing goodnight at the door, and no doubt she lives in a flat with 3 other girls, and they were probably all listening the other side of the door. It was a real game. And she'd say, "What are we going to do? What are we going to do?" And of course Mary knew exactly what she meant, but I was too dumb to realise it at the time. She was telling me, "Get on with it." Coming down the back straight at Winton in a 6-hour race, I can't tell you what lap number, but that's when it happened. Because you can snuggle up to a girl or a woman, but you can't snuggle up to a piece of tin called a motor car, and that the piece of tin was now less important. She was all important. You sort of get what I'm getting at? So there you go. Lucky me. I asked Grandma to marry me because it seemed the right thing to do. I was looking for a woman to be my wife and to be the mother of my children. There was a shopping list which was just wanted the right woman. It comes back to my grandmother and my mother. They were the examples, because I thought, this is the girl. I'd asked Grandma Ivy, Mum's mother, what she thought, and she said, the truth shines out of her eyes. I can tell you right down to the minute, basically, because my brother Tony got married, and he was the first one married, and then there was the second brother, and the third brother was me, because I was the oldest. After Tony's wedding, we were at a bit of a loose end, because the venue they'd finished with it, and they'd gone off on their honeymoon and had the tin cans tied to the back bumper and that sort of thing, like they do. And that was the night when, about 12 o'clock at night by this stage, or 1 o'clock being a wedding reception, you know, that goes on, and we were sitting on that couch. I can't remember exactly what shape we're in, but oh no, we were waiting at the door, and I think you got a feeling, didn't you say once again, what are we going to do? I think one of us had to make the first move, and we were hedging a bit, and I said, would you marry me? Would you marry me? And Mary said, are you joking? And I said, that's right. I said, no. I said, I've never been so serious about something in my whole life. Would you marry me? And you said, yes, I will. And the next morning the girls at the flat, and it all started to spread around, and we put the ad in the paper, and life went on. We got married in Tasmania at St Joseph's Church. St Joseph's? Sacred Heart Church, sorry, St Joseph's. In Alveston, Tasmania, where Mary came from, 1969. And we came back from our honeymoon, brought the motor car on the ship, you know, the ferry, and we set up house in a YCW facility that we got that for an acorn rental, just to pay the gas bill for $1 a week. That's pretty good, isn't it? Yes. And then we began to have babies. Our first child, Mark, Andrea James, was born on November the 26th, 1970. Yes. And he weighed 8 pounds 5 ounces. He was a chubby little thing. I actually didn't get to see him born because they sent me home, which in Brighton then was only a mile away. It was home, even less. Get a good night's sleep. Nothing will happen in the morning, the nurse said. But it did. And about 1 o'clock in the morning the phone rings. And it was the hospital just down the road saying, "You become a father, you got a little boy." Oh, thank you very much. And then I was going to hang up. And the nurse said, "You're going to hang up, don't you want to see him?" Because I was half asleep. Yeah, "Oh, I got a boy, oh good, thanks." And I was going to but it didn't take long to fix that. Yes. So we'd always wanted to move to the country, Mary and I, and have a country life and bring up our children in a healthy physical and emotional and spiritual atmosphere. And so we worked towards the end of having that in the back of our mind, but then an actual invitation came forth, didn't it, Mary? Ian Drinkwater, that's who it was, who worked at the Mercedes dealership like I did, and had seen this ad in the paper. It's here somewhere, but I won't get it now. About that big, and it was, what's the word? Well, I rang up the number. I think I rang up a number, and the boss of the place, the boss of the dealership, and his service manager came all the way to Melbourne, drove down and interviewed me. After having interviewed me, they offered me the job. It was $10 rental. That's right, a rental house. Yes, a car, because at this stage we had sold the Stride, I think, from memory, the first time, or the second time. What did I say, $10 a week, a Ford mainline ute, nice old bucket, comfortable, V8 motor, enjoyed. We'd go on a Saturday afternoon with a double-barrel shotgun behind the seats, a utility, just 2 seats or 3 seats and a bench seat. And Mark was in a bassinet, little, what do you call them, carry baskets. And Mary would be driving and we'd see a rabbit, and you a couple of times pulled up by the side of the road and you handed me the gun and I hopped out and shot the rabbit, and then we hopped out and we used to make that a picnic with our little 1-year-old. Yeah, the Violet Town sports. Violet Town is between Euroa and Benalla, and it's a small town. My father lived there for quite a few years, up until he died recently. And this particular time we were on one of our afternoon jaunts, and we drove to the Violet Town races, where sports, where they tug of war and all sorts of sports. And we went to have a look. And when we were leaving, just at the gate of this sports ground, there was a snake. Someone said, there's a snake, and there was a black-headed snake, I think, crawling across the grass and through the fence, and was going to head into town. And I pulled up at the entrance to the sports ground and got the shotgun out and blasted the thing, but it didn't die, So I had to put 2 shots. I had a shotgun with 2 barrels. I had to have 2 shots, and I blasted him, and I got a standing ovation and a clap, because there were children everywhere. If this snake had bitten a child, they could die. They're not jokes, you know. But these days I'd probably be shot, and they'd have their snake there as mayor or something. The world's developed some funny ideas. Carl Barton was actually in Bendigo, had moved there to be a missionary. Benalla, did I say Bendigo? I meant Benalla. Carl Barton came up to the counter where I was in the spare parts department and said, "Hello, I'm Carl Barton. I've come here to be a missionary." And didn't mean much to me. I thought, oh yeah, fair enough. And he said, "Is there any hunting around here?" I said, "Hunting?" My ears pricked up. "Hunting? You're interested in hunting?" I said, "Yes." I said, "All the hunting, you can hunt rabbits and foxes and wild pigs," and his eyes lit up. And he said, "Would you take me out to spotlight?" "Spotlighting," he said. "You're not allowed to spotlight in America, rabbits, apparently." I didn't know that. Maybe they've changed it. I said, "Mate, you can, the rabbits will hate you, but the farmer will love you, because you can shoot as many as you like. There's too many, we never kill all of them, but we can kill enough to keep them down, and of course we like eating rabbits." And so he became a friend. The whole idea of us getting to know the Lord Jesus as Saviour was as mundane and as simple a thing as spending time with a bloke in the middle of the night up in the hills behind Benalla, and beautiful, and having sandwiches and cakes and everything that the women had prepared for us, and a thermos of tea or coffee or soup. That started the discussions, you might say. Yes, in 1973 we made a change. That it was a life and eternity change, because we came to realise that the Roman system, while it contained most of our friends we'd all been Catholics together, but we came to realise that they didn't have the answer to it, the eternal question. They had the answer to local things and doing things, but the eternal question, which is heaven and earth, heaven and hell, heaven or hell, I say, depended on what we do with Jesus, where we placed him. Who was he? What was he doing on earth? What did he accomplish? And so on. And this is when these became really intense things that happen, because you have to make a decision. God wants a decision from you. He's willing to save you, but it doesn't matter whether you're a 10-year-old or a 100-year-old. If you want to be saved, you can. And that's about where I got to, I think, at that stage. That's right, we started attending that church. I had attended a couple of times, and I was a bit wary about, because being a Catholic, Baptists are a strange group as far as Catholics are concerned. But I overcame my fear and my problems of going, and just went along, and I'd come home to Mary. And this also happened, and we still continued our little tete-a-tetes up in the hills, shooting rabbits and eating cakes and drinking coffee. And Louise said a sad thing in a way. When I was at Bible school, I'd go down leave home at 6 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, arrive at the Bible College in Croydon about 9, somewhere around there, and study and stay with one of, because all of the rest of my family were in Melbourne. So I stayed with them when I went to Melbourne. I had somewhere to stay with. I'd alternate, and because they're your family, they take care of you, sort of thing. And then I'd come home on Friday afternoon and have Bible study on Friday nights. We had a youth camp up in the hills that cost a lot of money to establish everything. We we had that, and usually they had working bees there on Saturday to mow grass or to weed or whatever it might be. Spend the weekend there, and then on Monday I'd be chopping wood and fixing everything up, and off to Melbourne again on Tuesday. When my grandchildren are parents, if I had one thing that I could present, it'd have to be the Bible, to instill the Bible. That's why we memorised it. The Bible in its proper authoritative position as far as teaching is concerned, and the revelation of the Lord Christ is concerned. That's the sorts of things. There's a lot more than that, but if they've got the scriptures, they've got the complete answer in their hand, and that can overcome anything really. When you, my grandchildren, grow up, I hope you have found this helpful in dealing with the everyday problems of life and going on to have a relationship with God that's not just a tongue relationship, but a heart relationship. As much as often we pretend when we really should be confessing. And that's all I can say.